It was a moment of pure rage, something that no parent should ever have to experience. The sound of a taser crackling through the air and the sight of it striking my 12-year-old daughter's body. Karen, the woman who had always been a thorn in our side, had finally crossed the line. She'd done it. She'd hurt my child. And in that split second, my world changed. The anger surged, and before I could think, I jammed the taser into her mouth and pulled the trigger. What happened next would leave everyone in shock. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of quiet, sun-drenched day where everything felt still, as though the world itself was taking a moment to breathe. The mother and daughter were outside in the front yard, the gentle rustling of the leaves in the trees, the only sound accompanying their efforts to enjoy a rare moment of peace. The daughter, her blonde hair tied up in a messy bun, was sitting on the porch steps, a book in hand, while the mother worked on tidying up the flowers in the garden. There was a serenity about the scene, a fleeting tranquility that neither of them knew would soon be shattered. But of course it didn't take long for Karen to appear. The woman had been a thorn in their side ever since they moved into the neighborhood. An HOA president who seemed to take it as her personal mission to make life difficult for anyone she deemed undesirable. Today was no different. The mother had just finished planting a few new roses when she heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's high heels clicking against the pavement, and the hair on the back of her neck immediately stood up. She turned to see Karen approaching, her face twisted into that signature condescending grin. "Well, well," Karen called out with a sharp, almost mocking tone. "I see you're still trying to make this yard look presentable. How quaint." The mother braced herself, trying not to show the irritation that was already bubbling beneath the surface. She knew all too well that Karen's idea of proper yard work wasn't just about the plants, it was about control. And Karen had never missed an opportunity to make snide remarks about her work in the garden, her daughter's condition, or anything else she could find to criticize. "I'm doing fine, Karen." "Thank you for asking," the mother replied tightly, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Oh, I'm sure you're doing just fine," Karen sneered, flicking a glance at the daughter sitting on the porch. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the girl's slouched posture and the book she was reading. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about her. It's really too bad that she's not more, how do I say this, well-behaved." The words stung, but the mother kept her composure. The girl's disabilities had always been a point of contention between them, and Karen's condescending attitude toward her daughter was nothing new. What was new, however, was the sharp edge to Karen's voice today, as though she was daring the mother to respond. "My daughter's behavior is just fine," the mother said firmly, her voice unwavering despite the knot of anger that was tightening in her chest. "She's learning and growing, just like any other child." But Karen wasn't listening. "Learning, huh?" she said with an exaggerated laugh. "Well, maybe she needs a little more discipline. I've seen children who are better behaved and they don't get nearly as many special privileges." The word special privileges cut through the air like a knife. The mother felt a surge of frustration, but she held back, knowing all too well that confronting Karen head-on would only escalate things. It was like trying to negotiate with a brick wall. "You don't understand, Karen," the mother said slowly, trying to keep her tone even. "Every child is different. She's doing her best, and so are we." But Karen wasn't interested in understanding. With a cruel, knowing smile, she stepped closer, her voice dropping into a low, almost threatening whisper. "You've got your special ramp out there, and you've got your special needs, but I can't help but wonder if maybe it's time someone taught you both a lesson. People like you, people who demand extra attention, just don't fit in here. You're making the neighborhood look bad." The words were venomous, cutting into the mother's resolve. Before she could respond, before she could stop herself, Karen did something that sent the entire situation into overdrive. Without warning, she pulled something from the side of her bag, a taser. The mother's eyes widened in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. "What? What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising with shock and fear. But Karen was already moving, her eyes gleaming with something darker, something dangerous. "Maybe this will help her learn some respect," Karen sneered, and in one swift motion, she aimed the taser at the daughter, who was still sitting on the steps, frozen in confusion. "Karen, no!" the mother screamed, but it was too late. With a crackling sound, the taser shot out its electric probes, striking the daughter directly in the chest. The girl's body jolted violently, her book flying out of her hands as she collapsed to the ground, the shock waves of the electric current coursing through her small, fragile frame. The sound of her cry of pain echoed in the mother's ears, a sound she would never forget. The mother's heart stopped. The world seemed to freeze around her as her daughter writhed on the ground, gasping for breath, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "Karen!" the mother screamed again, but her voice was raw with panic. She rushed to her daughters, sighed, but every second felt like an eternity, the desperation growing with every breath her daughter struggled to take. Karen stood there, watching the chaos unfold with a twisted satisfaction on her face. The mother could see the cruelty in her eyes as she looked down at the girl in pain, as though it was all some twisted lesson. The rage inside the mother ignited like wildfire, every nerve in her body screaming for justice, for revenge. But more than anything, she knew that Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The mother stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest that it seemed to drown out everything else. Her eyes were fixed on her daughter, still twitching violently on the ground, the shock from the taser still coursing through her fragile body. The scream of her daughter, faint and broken, echoed in the mother's ears, and in that instant, everything else in the world ceased to matter. The only thing that existed was Karen, standing just a few feet away, grinning wickedly as she watched her handiwork unfold. Karen's eyes gleamed with a cruel satisfaction, her lips curling into a smirk as she stood over the child she had just harmed. The power in her hand, the taser still smoking, seemed to fuel her. She was savoring the moment, relishing the fear she had caused. The mother could see it clearly now. This wasn't just about the ramp or some trivial disagreement. This was about Karen's need to dominate, to exert control over anyone she deemed weaker. The sight of her daughter on the ground, helpless and writhing, was the final straw. The mother's rage rose from somewhere deep inside her, a primal instinct to protect and defend her child against this monster standing in front of her. Her mind raced, the thoughts clashing, the anger threatening to explode. She wanted to scream, to shout, to tear Karen apart with her bare hands, but in that instant, something inside her snapped. The world slowed down, and her vision tunneled, focusing entirely on Karen, who was still standing there, basking in her victory. The mother's heart was racing, her fists clenched at her sides, the overwhelming desire to end this madness surging through her veins. In a blind rush of fury, she didn't think, didn't hesitate for even a second. Without warning, the mother lunged forward, her body moving on pure instinct. She was on Karen before Karen could even process what was happening, grabbing the taser from Karen's hand with a force that sent shockwaves through her own body. The weapon was cold in her grip, but the heat of her anger burned hotter than anything she had ever felt before. Karen tried to fight back, but her grip on the taser was weak, and the mother twisted it out of her hand with ease. The world around them seemed to disappear. The only thing that mattered was the mother's resolve. She brought the taser up, her hands shaking from adrenaline and fury, and without a single word, slammed it into Karen's mouth. The tasers, cold metal pressed against her lips, the weight of it now representing something more than just an instrument of violence. It was the embodiment of every moment of helplessness, every cruel word, every assault Karen had ever inflicted on them. Before Karen could even react, Before she could open her mouth to speak or scream, the mother fired the taser. The electrical current shot out with a sharp, deafening crack, and Karen's body jerked violently in response. The mother watched as Karen's eyes widened in shock, her body seizing as the electricity flooded through her system. The force of the taser sent Karen stumbling backward, her body unable to control the violent spasms as the current surged through her. The sound of Karen's body shaking, the raw energy of the shock waves pulsing through the air, was all the mother could hear. It felt like the world was ringing in her ears, her breath shallow as she stood over Karen, watching the woman writhe in agony on the ground. The mother didn't feel any remorse. Not yet. She didn't feel guilt, not for what she had just done. All she felt was the rush of justice, the knowledge that her daughter was finally safe, that this woman, this tormentor, was now at her mercy. The neighborhood had gone silent. The bustling, normally loud world around them was eerily still, as if time itself had paused to watch the moment unfold. The air felt thick with the raw energy of what had just happened, and for a few long seconds, the only sounds were Karen's tortured gasps and the crackling of the taser still firing. Finally, the taser clicked off, and Karen's body collapsed to the ground in a heap. Her chest heaved as she struggled to breathe, her limbs twitching involuntarily as the shock subsided. She lay there, on the ground, vulnerable and defeated, her earlier bravado completely shattered. The smirk was gone, replaced by the cold reality of what had just happened. The mother stood over her, breathing heavily, her hands still trembling from the overwhelming surge of emotions. She didn't know what had come over her. This wasn't who she was. But in that moment, in that heartbeat of time, she had been ready to do anything, to go to any extreme, to protect her daughter from the woman who had hurt her. And for the first time, the mother allowed herself to look down at her daughter, who was now slowly sitting up, her body shaking but alive. The relief that flooded through her was almost too much to bear. Her daughter was safe. The woman who had caused so much pain was now at her feet, powerless. As the mother stepped back, she stared down at Karen, her chest still tight with the tension of what had just occurred. Karen was alive, but her power was broken. For the first time, the mother could see the extent of her own strength, the fierce, untamable love she had for her daughter. It was a love that would stop at nothing, a love that would fight, even if it meant crossing lines she had never imagined crossing. The sound of footsteps approaching from the distance broke through the silence, and the reality of what had just happened began to set in. The mother didn't know what would come next. But for now, she had protected her child, and that was all that mattered. The mother stood still, the taser still clutched in her trembling hand, her chest heaving with each ragged breath she took. She looked down at Karen, who was now lying on the ground, gasping for air, her body still twitching from the aftershocks of the electric current. The sharp crackle of the taser fading into the air was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence that had fallen over them. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, the weight of the situation pressing down on the mother's chest like 1,000 tons. She stood over Karen, watching as the woman's body jerked involuntarily with the fading effects of the taser. The realization of what had just happened began to sink in, slowly, like a heavy wave creeping over her. The mother's heart raced, and for a split second she felt a flicker of doubt, a whisper of hesitation in the back of her mind. Had I gone too far? She wondered, her gaze still fixed on Karen's still form. The anger that had driven her to act so fiercely was now met with the crushing weight of consequence. She had just assaulted someone, in a way that couldn't be undone. Was it right? Was this the only way to protect her daughter? Could there have been another choice? She looked down at the taser in her hand, still feeling the metallic coldness of it in her palm. It seemed so small, so insignificant in comparison to the rush of emotions that had propelled her into this moment. She had never imagined she would be here, standing over Karen, the woman who had tormented them for so long, now at her mercy. Karen, who had hurt her daughter in ways that words could never fully capture, was now the one writhing on the ground, helpless and vulnerable. But as her gaze shifted to her daughter, who was still on the ground, shaking but very much alive, the mother's doubts began to dissolve. The girl was still breathing, her chest rising and falling with each labored breath, her hands trembling as she slowly pushed herself up to a sitting position. The sight of her daughter, alive but scared, recovering, was all the mother needed to clear away the haze of doubt that had begun to cloud her mind. The anger that had ignited in her chest earlier surged once more, hot and sharp, like fire coursing through her veins. No, the mother thought firmly, shaking her head slightly as she looked at Karen again. This wasn't just about self-defense. This wasn't just about protecting my daughter from a single attack. This was about taking a stand. It was about showing that they couldn't be walked over anymore, that no one could hurt her daughter without facing consequences. Karen had pushed them too far. She had taken things too far. And now, there was no turning back. The mother stepped back from Karen, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her as the adrenaline began to wear off. Her mind was still racing, still processing everything that had just occurred. The harshness of the situation, the desperation that had driven her to do something she never thought she would, had not yet fully settled within her. But the sight of Karen, struggling to regain her bearings, only fueled the fire inside her. The fear and panic that had gripped her moments before were gone, replaced by a cold sense of clarity. Karen had hurt her daughter, and the mother wasn't going to stand by and let her get away with it. Her daughter, though shaken, was beginning to regain some composure. The mother knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair out of her daughter's face as she looked into her tear-streaked eyes. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, though she tried to steady it. The girl nodded, slowly, her eyes wide, and still filled with fear, but the relief was visible in the way her trembling hands reached out for her mother's. The mother pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her heart still hammering in her chest. But the warmth of her daughter's body in her arms grounded her. The daughter's sobs subsided as she clung to her mother, the comfort of her touch slowly calming the chaos in both of them. Meanwhile, Karen, still recovering from the effects of the taser, was trying to sit up, her face twisted in disbelief. The cruelty in her eyes had been replaced by something else now, a mix of anger and humiliation as she glared at the mother. But there was something else there, too. Fear. For the first time, Karen was no longer the one in control. For the first time, she was powerless. The mother glanced back at Karen, her expression hardening. There was no apology, no sign of remorse. The woman still didn't understand, still didn't get it. It didn't matter how much Karen tried to justify her actions. The mother knew this was the only way. She had protected her daughter. In a world where people like Karen took advantage of their positions of power, where cruelty went unchecked, this was the only language that mattered. The mother wasn't just defending her daughter anymore. She was making sure that Karen knew she couldn't intimidate them, that they wouldn't let anyone walk over them again. As the silence stretched on, the mother stood up slowly, taking one last look at Karen, whose body was still twitching from the after-effects of the taser. The woman was now weak, stripped of her earlier arrogance. The mother felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but more than that, she felt something else rising within her, a new sense of purpose. She would not allow this to be the end of it. Whatever came next, she would stand strong, and as the sirens of approaching police vehicles grew louder in the distance, the mother's resolve only solidified. She had done what needed to be done. For her daughter, for herself, for their future. They were no longer victims. Now, they were a force to be reckoned with. The storm was only just beginning, but she would fight it with everything she had. And in that moment, she knew that nothing at all, would stop her from protecting her child. The chaos of the moment was only just beginning. As Karen, stunned and humiliated, scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged, she shot the mother a venomous glare, her lips trembling with fury. Her once strong posture was now broken, her confidence shattered under the weight of her actions. She had never imagined a moment like this, a moment where she, the notorious HOA president, the one who had always wielded power with an iron fist, would find herself helpless, on the receiving end of justice. But the mother didn't have time to savor this twisted form of victory. The sound of footsteps and the murmur of voices from the surrounding houses grew louder. Neighbors had begun to gather, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Some stood frozen, watching from a distance, while others slowly approached, whispers of disbelief passing between them. A few had already taken out their phones, recording the scene with the clear intent to share it with the world. The reality of the situation was dawning on everyone. The woman who had terrorized the neighborhood for so long was finally being held accountable, and the mother who had stood up for her child was being thrust into the center of the storm. Karen, now realizing the full extent of her isolation, took a step back, her eyes wild with rage. "You assaulted me!" she spat, pointing an accusatory finger at the mother, her voice rising with each word. "You attacked me! You have no right! You'll regret this!" The mother, however, didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, her posture unwavering as she stood in front of her daughter, who was now clinging to her side, still shaking from the ordeal. "I did what I had to do to protect my daughter. You're the one who crossed the line, Karen," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Her words rang with authority, an undeniable truth that hung heavy in the air. The tension was palpable, as if the entire neighborhood had become a powder keg, just waiting for the match to strike. Karen's accusations were met with skepticism from the growing crowd of onlookers. Neighbors who had long been afraid to speak up, who had endured Karen's reign of control for years, now found themselves watching with a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. There were no cheers, no shouts of victory for the mother, only an uncomfortable, suffocating silence, as though everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Before long, the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the thick air, and the flashing lights of the police vehicles illuminated the street. The arrival of the officers seemed to break the tension, but it also marked the beginning of something much larger. The police quickly stepped out of their vehicles, their presence commanding attention as they assessed the scene with practiced eyes. Two officers immediately moved toward Karen, while another approached the mother, who was still standing tall, her daughter now tucked safely beside her. Karen was quick to start her side of the story, her voice high-pitched and filled with a sense of righteous indignation. "She attacked me. I was just trying to tell her the truth, and she assaulted me in front of everyone. You can't let her get away with this," she screamed, pointing at the mother. But the officers, who had been briefed by a few of the witnesses, weren't so quick to take Karen's word for it. They turned their attention to the growing crowd, who had begun to speak up. It was clear that the narrative was shifting. Several neighbors came forward, recounting what they had seen moments before the police arrived. "Karen attacked that girl first," one neighbor spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. "She tased her, out of nowhere. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was pure cruelty." Others chimed in, adding their voices to the chorus. "I saw it. The mother was just trying to protect her. She wasn't the one who started it." With each statement, Karen's attempts to turn the story in her favor crumbled. The officers exchanged glances, and it was clear they were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Karen's aggressive actions toward the daughter, the unprovoked assault, and her own attempts to escalate the situation had now been exposed for what they were. The mother stood there, her body still, tense but composed as the officers continued to gather statements. She wasn't afraid of what was coming next. This wasn't just about what had happened today. It was about something larger, the years of intimidation, the constant bullying, the unchecked power that had allowed Karen to wreak havoc on so many lives in the neighborhood. And now, it was over. The balance had shifted. After a few moments of quiet deliberation, one of the officers turned to Karen, his expression stern. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assaulting a minor. We're going to have to take you in," he said, his voice calm but firm, signaling the end of Karen's reign of terror. Karen's face went pale. The fear was evident in her eyes now, her mouth opening and closing in shock as the officer moved toward her, placing her hands behind her back. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "I'm the HOA president! You can't arrest me!" But the officer didn't respond. He simply secured the cuffs around her wrists, his expression unyielding as he led her toward the police vehicle. As Karen was escorted away, the crowd of neighbors watched in stunned silence, some whispering to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the turn of events. The mother, still standing in the same spot, let out a slow breath. Her daughter was safe, and justice had been served. The police were taking Karen away, but something bigger was happening here. The community was beginning to see that there was a cost to unchecked power, that people could only be silenced for so long before they fought back. In the weeks that followed, the news of Karen's arrest spread through the neighborhood and beyond. The community rallied around the mother, recognizing her bravery and the courage it took to stand up for her daughter, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. A sense of solidarity began to form, and Karen's grip on the HOA weakened as more and more people stood up to her. As for the mother, she knew the battle wasn't over, but she had already won something far greater than any confrontation could offer. She had shown her daughter what it meant to fight for what was right, to stand up against cruelty and injustice. And as she watched Karen's arrest unfold, she felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that this was just the beginning of their new life, a life where they were no longer afraid. The mother and daughter sat together in the living room, the weight of everything that had happened still pressing heavily on them. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The air was thick with a mixture of relief and disbelief, and the soft ticking of the clock seemed like the only thing that could be heard in the otherwise quiet room. The mother looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a complex blend of emotions, pride, fear, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. Her daughter, still shaken, clung to her side, her small frame tucked against her mother for comfort. They had been through something unimaginable, but they had made it out the other side, at least physically unscathed. Emotionally, however, they both knew it was far from over. Karen's arrest had been just the beginning. Though the mother felt a glimmer of justice in seeing her tormentor taken away in handcuffs, she also understood that Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She would likely press charges, twisting the events to suit her narrative, painting herself as the victim, as she always had. The mother knew that the legal battle ahead would be long and grueling, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The mother took a deep breath, her fingers still trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. She had been avoiding the flood of messages and calls since the police had left, but now it was time. She had to speak out. She had to make sure that Karen didn't win, that she didn't twist the truth and manipulate the situation to her advantage. As she unlocked her phone, her eyes scanned the screen for the media contacts she had been sent earlier. Journalists from local outlets who had been waiting for her statement. She felt a lump form in her throat, the reality of the moment finally sinking in. Before she could press the send button, her daughter looked up at her, her face pale but determined. "Mom, what happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice still thick with the tremors of fear. "Are we going to have to fight her? Is she going to make everything worse?" The mother paused, her heart aching at the fear in her daughter's voice. "We'll fight her together," she said softly, placing a hand on her daughter's. "We're not backing down. No matter what, we'll stand tall. She's tried to hurt us for too long, but this is our turn. No one gets to walk over us anymore, not her, not anyone." Her daughter nodded, the bravery in her small frame helping to steady the mother's own resolve. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear, but the mother had learned something crucial in the past few hours. When it came to her daughter, nothing would stop her. Nothing. With a deep breath, the mother made the decision. It was time. She dialed the contact number, and within seconds, a journalist answered the call. The mother's voice, though tired, was clear and unwavering as she spoke into the phone. "I know this isn't what anyone expected, but I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. Karen isn't just someone who made a mistake. She's a bully who's been using her power to control this neighborhood for far too long," the mother said, her words flowing freely now, fueled by the surge of emotion that had built up in her over the last few hours. "She targeted my daughter, and I won't let her get away with it. I don't care what it costs me. I will not let her hurt anyone else." The journalist listened intently, taking notes as the mother continued. The words coming faster now, the weight of the moment pushing her forward. "What happened today wasn't just about defending my child. It's about standing up for every family she's tried to intimidate, every person she's manipulated with her power. I won't let her control this neighborhood anymore, and I won't let her get away with what she's done to my daughter. This fight is only just beginning, and I'll make sure the world knows the truth." There was a long pause on the other end of the line as the journalist absorbed what the mother had said. Finally, the voice on the other end responded. "You're making a powerful statement. We'll help you get your story out there. People need to hear this." The mother hung up the phone, her hand still gripping it tightly. The world was about to know. The truth would no longer be hidden, buried under Karen's web of lies and manipulation. And for the first time in a long time, the mother felt a sense of clarity and purpose. This was the right thing to do. This was the way forward. Turning to her daughter, the mother smiled softly. "We've got this," she said, her voice strong now. "I promise you, we're going to fight, and we're going to win." Her daughter, still visibly shaken but no longer as afraid, nodded. "I'm with you, Mom. I know we'll make it through this." The mother's heart swelled with pride, and she pulled her daughter into a tight hug, holding her close as if to reassure herself as much as the girl. The world outside had suddenly grown much bigger, and yet, at that moment, it was just the two of them. Two people bound together by love, by courage, and by a shared determination that would carry them through whatever came next. In the coming days, the media coverage exploded. The story of Karen's actions and the mother's brave stand against her spread quickly, stirring up both support and backlash. Karen, of course, tried to spin the narrative in her favor, but the truth was stronger. The witnesses, the video footage from the neighbors, and the overwhelming public support for the mother and daughter painted a picture that was impossible for Karen to distort. And when the legal battles began, the mother and daughter stood their ground, knowing they had already won something much bigger than any court ruling. They had found their voice, and they would not be silenced again. As the fight for justice continued, the mother promised herself and her daughter that they would never let fear control them again. The journey was far from over, but they were stronger now, more united than ever. And with that strength, they knew they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, standing together, never backing down. The story isn't over. Karen's reign of terror is just beginning to unravel, and the mother's fight for justice has only just started. If you believe in standing up for your loved ones, protecting what's right, and fighting back against injustice, follow the HOA stories for more shocking revelations and real stories of courage. Don't miss a moment of this ongoing battle. Stay tuned.